In the Wild West of pre-Mega Drive era Sega, some strange old stuff happened. The publisher was happy to hand the rights to its games to many different publishers simply because the company didn't have any sort of foothold in certain markets. As the Master System proved to be a complete failure in North America, this allowed Tengen the opportunity to cozy up with Sega and develop some ports of Sega titles for the NES. These games even made their way around Nintendo's strict licensing agreement thanks to Tengen's efforts in reverse engineering the system to create their own third-party cartridges that bypass the system's lockout chip. It's a weird old sequence of events that led to some very interesting 8-bit ports of some Sega classics, and we're going to look at 4 of them and another unrelated Famicom game here. First up, we've got Alien Syndrome from 1988. Despite being a pretty ugly game with its rotten choice of colours, this actually plays pretty well, and it's a damn good version of a technically more advanced arcade title. We unfortunately lose the backgrounds in the transition to the boss battles, but this is a common tactic employed by NES games as large sprites like boss characters simply cannot be drawn on the NES without use of the background layer, and you'll see this tactic employed a few times in this video. But yeah, Alien Syndrome for the NES is a pretty solid approximation of the forced perspective shoot and save 'em up. Next up we've got Fantasy Zone from 1987, which loses a few things in its transition to the NES, but like Alien Syndrome, still manages to play pretty well. The big loss here is the majority of the enemy bases, which means there's less things to shoot on any stage. The game also suffers from some extreme flicker, which is often prevalent on NES titles as the system has a hard time drawing a lot of sprites on a horizontal axis. We also get that similar loss of backgrounds when the game transitions to a boss, which is no bad thing, but it's certainly noticeable when you're familiar with the original. But despite these downgrades, there's still a decent playing shmup in here, even if it is now a little bit on the easy side. Afterburner 2 hit the NES in 1989, and despite smaller sprites, this is largely comparable to the Master System port. The movement of the horizon is still nowhere near as smooth as the arcade original or the Mega Drive version, but despite its jerkiness, it still manages to convey the banking and barrel rolls of your Tomcat pretty well. The controls are responsive, and the sound effect used to signify you're locked on is a pretty good alternative to the shout of fire from the more advanced ports of the game. I'm also a big fan of the cheeky switch from Sega to Tengen on the air carrier you take off from, and we also get another blank background transition as the game draws in the massive aircraft that refills your ammo. Overall, another solid 8-bit port of a Sega arcade classic. Next up we've got the 1989 port of Shinobi. Once again, I think the weakest part of this port is the visuals, which are a little ugly, but the game makes up for this in playability. This is a seriously responsive and tight little 8-bit conversion that is largely comparable to the Master System version. You even get the expanded health bar so you don't have to worry about one-hit deaths. I hate to repeat myself, but what this lacks in visuals, it more than makes up for in playability. It's nowhere near as bad as it could have been. And finally, let's move away from Tengen for a moment to discuss Asmic's 1990 Famicom port of Altered Beast. This version is only referred to by its original Japanese title, which I'm not going to try and pronounce because there are far too many vowels in that word. This port is probably the biggest shock of the lot because it's actually a much better playing game than its Master System counterpart. The nasty jerky scrolling of the Master System version is gone, and the choice to map jump to both fire buttons has also been banished for the more favourable method of pressing up to jump, and it all works really well. Sure, the visuals are once again a little ugly, with the sprites looking noticeably crushed, but it's a small price to pay for a great 8-bit port of Altered Beast that even includes some new content as well.